A dream-shattered Natalie Harper stared at the termination letter in her trembling hands, the words blurring through her unshed tears. After 3 years of dedicating her heart and soul to teaching music at Riverside Elementary School in her small Ohio hometown, budget cuts had claimed her position. At 22, with no family left and barely enough savings to cover next month's rent, she felt utterly lost. The tiny apartment she called home felt suffocating that evening. Natalie sat at her old upright piano, the same one her grandmother had left her, and let her fingers drift across the keys. The melancholy melody that emerged seemed to capture all the uncertainty swirling in her heart. She had always believed that if she worked hard enough, life would reward her efforts. But now that faith felt naive. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Casey. Still haven't heard back from that interview in New York? You should. Follow up. Natalie glanced at the email she'd sent 3 days ago to Harmony Arts Academy, a prestigious private school in Manhattan. They had seemed interested in her application. The silence since then spoke volumes. Taking a deep breath, she decided to make one last attempt. Sometimes showing initiative in person made all the difference. With her meager savings, she could afford a bus ticket to New York and maybe one night in a budget hotel. It was a risk she couldn't afford not to take. Journey to the unknown. The Greyhound bus journey from Ohio to New York took 14 hours, and Natalie spent most of it rehearsing what she would say to convince the academy to give her a chance. She wore her only professional outfit, a navy blue dress she'd bought for her college graduation, and clutched a worn leather portfolio containing her credentials and letters of recommendation. As the Manhattan skyline came into view, Natalie's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and terror. She had never been in a city this large, where buildings stretched toward the clouds and people moved with purpose she could barely comprehend. The cacophony of car horns, construction sounds, and millions of conversations created a symphony, unlike anything she'd ever heard. Her first stop was the budget hotel she'd booked online. The Golden Rest Inn looked nothing like its photos, with peeling paint and a lobby that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. But it was all she could afford, and she reminded herself that this was just for one night. "I'm sorry, miss," the desk clerk said after typing her information into an ancient computer. "We don't have your reservation." System shows were completely booked. Natalie's heart sank. "But I paid online 3 days ago. I have the confirmation number." The clerk, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, shrugged apologetically. "Online booking. Companies sometimes double books happens more than it should. I can try calling around to other places in your budget range." 20 minutes and 12 phone calls later, the news was grim. Every affordable hotel in Manhattan was full due to a medical convention. The clerk handed her a slip of paper with an address. "This is the fanciest place I know, the Azure. They might have something, but it'll cost you." The wrong door, the Azure. Hotels stood like a crystal palace among the Manhattan skyscrapers, its glass facade reflecting the evening lights of the city. Natalie felt completely out of place as she approached the golden revolving doors, her small suitcase squeaking with every step. Doormen in pristine uniforms nodded politely. Probably wondering what someone like her was doing in their establishment, the marble lobby took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over guests who looked like they'd stepped out of fashion magazines. Natalie approached the reception desk, where a woman with perfect makeup and a French accent greeted her. "I know this is a long shot," Natalie began, "but do you have any rooms available tonight? The most basic thing you have would be perfect." The receptionist's fingers danced across her computer keyboard. "We do have one room available, though it's quite expensive. The penthouse suite is available for $3,500 per night." Natalie's face must have gone pale because the woman immediately softened. "Perhaps there's been a cancellation. In our standard rooms, let me check with my manager." While waiting, Natalie noticed a commotion near the elevators. A man in an expensive suit was arguing with hotel security about privacy and media intrusion. She couldn't hear the details, but his frustration was evident even from across the spacious lobby. "Miss Harper," the receptionist called. "You're in luck. We've had a last-minute cancellation. Room 3247. It's normally $800 per night, but I can offer it for $200. It was still more than Natalie wanted to spend, but she was exhausted and had no other options. She handed over her credit card, praying it wouldn't be declined, and received her key card with shaking hands. The mistake that changed everything. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor gave Natalie time to collect herself. Tomorrow, she would nail the interview at Harmony Arts Academy, land the job, start her new life in New York. She had to believe that everything would work out. The hallway was carpeted in deep burgundy, the artwork that probably cost more than her annual salary back in Ohio. Room numbers were displayed in elegant brass, and she followed them until she reached what should have been 3,247. The keycard worked perfectly. Natalie stepped into what appeared to be paradise. Floor-to ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park. The living area was larger than her entire apartment back home, with plush furniture arranged around a fireplace. But something felt wrong. This looked more like a penthouse than a regular hotel room. Maybe they upgraded me, she whispered to herself. Though she knew that was unlikely, Natalie wheeled her suitcase toward what she assumed was the bedroom. Marveling at the marble bathroom and fully stocked bar, she passed along the way. The bedroom was magnificent. Dominated by a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets and more pillows than she'd ever seen in one place. Exhausted from travel and emotional stress, she decided to take a hot shower before settling in for the night. The bathroom was a masterpiece of modern design, with a rainfall shower that felt like luxury itself. For 20 minutes, she let the warm water wash away the anxiety and disappointment of recent weeks. Wrapped in the softest bathrobe she'd ever touched, Natalie emerged from the bathroom to find she was no longer alone. The billionaire's surprise a man stood with his back to her, talking on his phone in low, urgent tones. Was tall, probably around 6 feet, with dark hair slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. His suit jacket was draped over a chair, and his white shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing strong forearms. "I don't care what the tabloids are saying," he was saying into the phone. "My personal life is not their business, and I won't dignify their speculation with a response." Natalie stood frozen, clutching the bathrobe closed. This was clearly not her room, and this man was clearly not expecting to find someone in his bathroom. She cleared her throat softly, and he spun around. The first thing she noticed were his eyes. They were a striking shade of green, but there was something guarded in them, as if he'd learned to keep the world at arm's length. His features were sharp and aristocratic, the kind of face that graced magazine covers and boardroom portraits. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, never taking his eyes off Natalie. "I am so sorry," she began, words tumbling out in a rush. "There's been a terrible mistake. I'm supposed to be in room 3,247, but I think I'm in the wrong place. The key card worked, and I didn't realize. I was just showering, and I didn't know you were here." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her damp hair, the oversized bathrobe, and her obvious mortification. Most people who encountered Jackson Pierce uninvited wanted something from him: money, business deals, or simply the cachet of being associated with his name. But this young woman seemed genuinely horrified by the situation. "You're definitely in the wrong place," he said, though his tone wasn't harsh. "This is the penthouse suite." "The penthouse," Natalie repeated weakly. "I knew $200 was too good to be true." Despite himself, Jackson found his lips curving into what might have been a smile. $200? The receptionist said there was a cancellation. "I should have known something was wrong when I saw this place." Natalie gestured around the luxurious room. "I'll get my things and go right away. I'm really sorry to have disturbed you." She moved toward her small suitcase, but Jackson held up a hand. "Where exactly are you planning to go at 11 o'clock at night?" "Every hotel in the city is booked. I'll figure something out. Maybe the bus station has a waiting area." The idea of this young woman spending the night in Penn Station didn't sit well with Jackson, though he couldn't quite understand why. He'd built his fortune in technology by making calculated decisions based on logic, not emotion. But something about her genuine distress and complete lack of artifice struck him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Natalie Harper." "Well, Natalie Harper, it seems we have a problem. You've already paid for a room that doesn't exist. You have nowhere to go. and I'm apparently the only person in Manhattan with an extra bedroom. Tonight I couldn't possibly, Natalie said quickly. I don't even know who you are, Jackson Pierce, he said, watching for recognition in her eyes. Most people knew his name from business magazines or gossip columns, but Natalie's expression remained blank. Nice to meet you, Mr. Pierce. But really, I can't impose on your kindness. I've already disrupted your evening enough. Jackson realized he was at a crossroads. The sensible thing would be to call hotel security and have them sort out the room situation. But something about Natalie's dignity in the face of embarrassment, her refusal to take advantage of his offer, despite her obvious desperation, intrigued him. You're not imposing, he said. You're solving a problem, the hotel maid. An error that left you stranded, and I have more space than I could use in a lifetime. The guest bedroom has its own bathroom, and you'll be gone in the morning. Simple solution. An unexpected kindness, Natalie looked around the penthouse again, trying to process the surreal turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she'd been an unemployed music teacher from Ohio. Now she was standing in a New York penthouse, wrapped in a bathrobe, being offered shelter by a complete stranger who seemed far too sophisticated for someone like her. I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage, she said carefully. I've never been in a situation like this. Neither have I, Jackson admitted, and he realized it was true. He couldn't remember the last time he'd invited anyone into his private space, especially someone he'd just met. But desperate times call for creative solutions. He showed her to the guest bedroom, which was nearly as impressive as the master's suite. Natalie set her suitcase on the luggage rack and turned to thank him. But Jackson had already disappeared, giving her privacy to collect herself. When she emerged 20 minutes later, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, she found him in the kitchen area of the open-plan living space. He'd changed into casual clothes, dark jeans, and a gray sweater that looked like it. Probably cost more than her monthly salary, and was making coffee. I hope you don't mind, he said, holding up a mug. I'm something of an insomniac, and tonight's events aren't helping. I drink coffee, Natalie said, accepting the mug gratefully. The rich aroma alone was enough to relax her slightly. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the city lights. Natalie had never seen anything like the view. From this height, Central Park stretched out below them like a dark jewel surrounded by the glittering grid of Manhattan streets. Can I ask what brings you to New York? Jackson said eventually. Besides hotel room mix-ups, I mean. Job interview, Natalie replied. I'm a music teacher. Was a music teacher. Budget cuts ended that career, so I'm trying to start over. That's brave. That's desperate, she corrected with a self-deprecating laugh. But I suppose sometimes they're the same thing. Jackson studied her profile as she gazed out at the city. There was something refreshing about her honesty, her lack of pretense. In his world, every conversation was layered with hidden agendas and calculated moves. But Natalie seemed incapable of artifice. What kind of music do you teach? He asked. Everything but piano is my specialty. My grandmother was a pianist, and she taught me everything she knew. There's something magical about music, the way it can express things that words can't touch. Play something, Jackson said impulsively. Natalie looked startled. I couldn't. There's a piano in the living room. I've had it for 3 years and never heard it played. She followed his gaze to a beautiful black grand piano that dominated one corner of the room. It was clearly expensive, probably a collector's piece, but it also looked lonely somehow. You have a Steinway Model M and you've never heard it played? Natalie's voice held a note of something between horror and wonder. I bought it because the decorator said it would complete the room. I don't actually play. Before she could stop herself, Natalie was crossing the room and lifting the piano bench. Her fingers found the keys naturally, and she began to play a piece by Chopin, not one of the famous ones that everyone knew, but a lesser-known nocturne that had always spoken to her heart. The music filled the penthouse with warmth and life. In a way, Jackson hadn't expected. He watched Natalie's face as she played, seeing how the tension left her features and something beautiful took its place. This was who she really was, he realized. Not the nervous young woman who'd stumbled into his life by accident, but this confident artist who could make magic happen with just her hands and a keyboard. When the piece ended, The silence that followed felt different from before. It was charged with possibility, with the recognition that something significant had just passed between them. "That was incredible," Jackson said softly. Natalie's cheeks flushed pink. "Thank you. It's been a while since I've played on an instrument." "This beautiful, keep it," he said without thinking. "What? I mean, while you're in New York? If you get the job, if you stay in the city, the piano should be played, not just admired." Natalie stared at him, wondering what kind of person offered a stranger access to a $100,000 piano. Everything about this man confused her. He was clearly wealthy and successful, but there was something lonely about him too, something that recognized the loneliness in her own heart. "Mr. Pierce," she began. Jackson, don't understand why you're being so kind to someone you just met." He was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Maybe because kindness is rare enough that we should practice it when we have the chance." As they stood there in the soft light of the penthouse, with the piano between them and the city sparkling beyond the windows, neither of them could have imagined how much their lives were about to change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and impossible choices, but tonight, for the first time in months, neither of them felt quite so alone. The clock struck midnight, marking not just the end of a day, but the beginning of something that would transform them both in ways they never could have predicted. Morning revelations. Natalie woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and momentarily forgot where she was. The Egyptian cotton sheets felt like silk against her skin, and the mattress was so comfortable she'd slept deeper than she had in months. Reality crashed back as she remembered the events of the previous night, and her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She had slept in a billionaire's penthouse. She had played his piano. She had accepted kindness from a complete stranger whose world was so far removed from hers that they might as well have been from different planets. The sound of quiet conversation drifted from the main living area, and Natalie realized Jackson was on a phone call. She checked her phone and gasped. It was already 9:30, and her interview at Harmony Arts Academy was at 11. She had exactly 90 minutes to get across the city. She had no idea how long that would take. Quickly, she gathered her belongings and dressed in her interview outfit, trying to tame her auburn hair into something professional. When she emerged from the guest bedroom, Jackson was ending his call and turned to greet her. "Good morning," he said, and she noticed he looked like he'd been awake for hours. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he wore a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. "I took the liberty of having breakfast sent up. I thought you might be hungry." On the dining table sat a spread that looked like something from a 5-star restaurant. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, Benedict, and coffee that smelled like heaven. Natalie's stomach reminded her that she'd been too nervous to eat much the day before. "This is incredibly kind, but I really need to go," she said, slinging her purse over her shoulder. "My interview is in an hour and a half, and I have no idea how to get there." "Harmony Arts Academy on the Upper East Side," Jackson said, and when she looked surprised, he smiled slightly. "I mentioned it last night. It's about a 20-minute drive from here, depending on traffic." 20 minutes? Natalie had assumed she'd need at least an hour on public transportation. "My driver can take you," Jackson offered. "He's downstairs waiting anyway." "I can't keep accepting favors from you," Natalie protested. "You've already done more for me than I can ever repay." "Consider it an investment in the arts," Jackson said, pouring coffee into a travel mug. "Besides, Marcus is an excellent driver, and he knows the city better than GPS. You'll make a better impression. If you arrive calm and on time, rather than frazzled from navigating the subway system, the interview disaster, the ride to Harmony Arts." Academy gave Natalie time to review her portfolio and practice her answers to likely interview questions. Marcus, Jackson's driver, was a friendly man in his 50s who offered encouragement and even shared that his daughter was a musician struggling to make it in the city. "Mr. Pierce is good people," Marcus said as they pulled up to the academy. "Doesn't matter what the newspapers say about him. I've worked for him 3 years, and he's never been anything but decent." The academy was housed in a beautiful brownstone that had been converted into classrooms and practice rooms. Natalie could hear piano scales and violin exercises drifting from open windows, Her heart lifted with the familiar sounds of musical education. The interview started well. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the head of the music department, was impressed with Natalie's credentials and her philosophy about making music accessible to students of all backgrounds. They toured the facilities, which were even better equipped than Natalie had hoped. "Your experience with integrated arts programs is exactly what we're looking for," Dr. Reeves said as they returned to her office. "We believe in nurturing not just technical skill, but creative expression and emotional intelligence through music." Natalie felt a surge of hope. This position would be perfect for her. And New York was starting to feel less overwhelming and more full of possibilities. Then Dr. Reeves asked the question that changed everything. "I do need to ask about your living situation. Miss Harper, we require all faculty to provide a permanent address in the city. And we've found that teachers who commute from far away often struggle with the demands of our extended day programs." Natalie's heart sank in all her planning and hoping. She had focused on getting the job without fully considering where she would live if she got it. Her research had shown that even the smallest apartments in Manhattan cost more than her entire salary back in Ohio. "I'm in the process of securing housing," she said, hoping it didn't sound as weak to Dr. Reeves as it did to her. "Of course. We understand the challenges of relocating. However, we would need confirmation of your address before we could finalize any offer." The rest of the interview felt like she was going through the motions. Dr. Reeves was polite but professional, and Natalie could sense the opportunity slipping away. Without a permanent address, she couldn't get the job. Without the job, she couldn't afford a permanent address. It was an impossible circle. A crushing reality when Natalie emerged from the academy an hour later. Marcus was waiting with the car. Her face must have shown her disappointment, because he immediately asked if everything was all right. "Well, until it didn't," she said, settling into the back seat. "I need an address to get the job, but I need the job to afford an address." "That's rough," Marcus said sympathetically. "But don't give up yet. New York has a way of working things out for people who really want to be here." During the drive back to the hotel, Natalie tried to process her options. She could return to Ohio with nothing to show for her efforts except a maxed-out credit card. She could try to find a cheaper place to stay and continue looking for work, but her savings would run out in a matter of days. Or she could swallow her pride and ask Jackson Pierce for advice. Though the thought of admitting her failure to someone so successful made her stomach churn, when they arrived at the Azure, Marcus walked her to the elevator. Mr. Pierce asked, "Me to let you know he's in a meeting until 2 o'clock, but you're welcome to wait in the penthouse if you'd like." The luxury of the penthouse felt almost mocking now. Natalie sat at the piano and played softly, letting her fingers find melancholy melodies that matched her mood. Music had always been her refuge in difficult times, but today even that comfort felt hollow. She was so lost in playing that she didn't notice Jackson's return until he cleared his throat softly. She looked up to find him standing in the doorway, his suit jacket removed and his tie loosened. There was something different about his expression, less guarded than she'd seen before. "That piece doesn't sound like Chopin," he said, settling into a nearby chair. "It's not. It's mine." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. "You compose? I dabble. It's not very good." "I disagree." Jackson leaned forward slightly. Heartbreak. The observation was so accurate it took Natalie's breath away. "The interview didn't go well," she said simply. "Want to talk about it?" An impossible offer. Natalie found herself explaining the entire situation to Jackson. From her financial constraints to the catch-22 of needing an address to get the job. He listened without interrupting, his green eyes focused intently on her face. "So I'll be on a bus back to Ohio tomorrow," she concluded. "At least I can say I tried." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "What if you didn't have to go back? What do you mean?" "I have a proposition." "For you?" He stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city. "I need a personal assistant. Someone discreet, intelligent, and capable of handling both professional and personal matters. The position comes with a competitive salary and a furnished apartment here in the building." Natalie stared at him. "You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a solution." You get the permanent address you need for the teaching position. Come while you establish yourself in the city, and time to network. Within the music education community. But you don't even know me, Natalie protested. You met me less than 24 hours ago when I accidentally broke into your hotel room. Jackson turned back to face her, and she caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in his expression before. His businessman's mask slid back into place. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that don't make perfect sense on paper. What would a personal assistant do exactly? Manage my calendar? Handle correspondence? Coordinate with household? Staff? Accompany me to social events when needed? Think of it as a temporary bridge to get you where you want to be. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Natalie felt overwhelmed. Why would you do this for me? Jackson was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Because I can. Because you need help, and I have the resources to provide it. Because last night, for the first time in longer than I can remember, this place felt less empty. The honesty in his voice made something flutter in Natalie's chest, but she pushed the feeling aside. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. A wealthy man helping out someone less fortunate? What aren't you telling me? She asked. This seems too good to be true. Smart question. Jackson's lips curved into what might have been a smile. The position comes with challenges. I value my privacy, but I'm often in the public eye. The media can be intrusive and occasionally cruel. Anyone associated with me becomes a target for speculation and gossip. What kind of speculation? The kind that sells magazines? Who I'm dating, why I'm dating them, when I'll get married, why I haven't gotten married. My personal life has been tabloid fodder for years, Natalie began to understand. So if I work for you, they'll assume we're romantically involved, probably. I can provide excellent references when you're ready to move on, but while you work, for me, your privacy will be somewhat compromised. The weight of the decision pressed down on Natalie. She could return to Ohio and the safety of familiar failure, or she could step into the unknown with a man who was offering her chances she'd never dreamed possible. How long would this arrangement last? She asked. However long you need. 6 months, a year, longer if it works out well for both of us. A leap of faith, Natalie walked to the piano and played a few random notes, trying to organize her thoughts. Everything logical told her to be suspicious of Jackson's offer. Men like him didn't rescue struggling music teachers out of pure altruism. But her instincts, which had always served her well, suggested that his motivations, while perhaps not entirely selfless, weren't malicious either. Can I ask you something? She said, turning to face him. What happened to your last personal assistant? I've never had one, Jackson admitted. I usually handle everything myself or delegate to my business staff. But my life has become more complicated recently, and I could use someone I trust to manage the personal aspects. You'd trust someone you just met? I'd trust someone who accidentally ended up in my penthouse and immediately tried to leave? I'd trust someone who refused expensive gifts and insisted on paying her own way. I'd trust someone who played my piano like she was having a conversation with an old friend. The way he looked at her when he said it made Natalie's heart skip a beat. There was something in his eyes that went beyond business arrangements and professional courtesy. But she couldn't let herself read too much into it. Men like Jackson Pierce didn't fall for small-town music teachers. She wouldn't let herself fall for men whose worlds were so different from hers. If I said yes, she said carefully, what would happen next? I'd have my attorney draw up a contract outlining salary, benefits, and responsibilities. You'd move into the apartment tomorrow, and you'd call Dr. Reeves to let her know you have a permanent address. The apartment comes furnished? Completely. All you need to bring are personal items. Natalie closed her eyes and tried to imagine explaining this to Casey back home. Her best friend would think she'd lost her mind, accepting a job offer from a stranger she'd met in such bizarre circumstances. But then she opened her eyes and looked around the penthouse, at the piano that had felt like home under her fingers. At Jackson, who was watching her with patient intensity. There's something else, Jackson said quietly. Something I should probably mention before you decide. Natalie's stomach tightened. What? I don't do this. I don't invite strangers into my home. I don't make impulsive job offers, and I don't. Let people get close enough to matter. But something about you feels different, and that scares me more than I'd like to admit." The confession hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them was ready to examine too closely. Natalie felt her cheeks warm as she processed his words. "Are you saying this isn't just about needing an assistant?" "I'm saying I don't know what this is about," Jackson replied honestly. "But I'd like the chance to find out." The decision that evening, Natalie sat at the piano again, this time playing through every piece she could remember while she thought about Jackson's offer. He had excused himself to handle business calls, giving her space to make her decision without pressure. The logical choice was obvious. She needed a job. He was offering one. She needed a place to live. He was providing one. She needed time, too. Establish herself in New York, and this arrangement would give her that opportunity. But logic didn't account for the way her pulse quickened when he looked at her, or the way her heart had stuttered when he'd admitted his own uncertainty about his motivations. When Jackson returned to the living room, Natalie was playing the composition she'd been working on earlier, but this time the melody had evolved. It was still tinged with sadness, but now there were notes of hope woven through the minor keys. "That sounds different," he observed, settling into his usual chair. "I've been thinking about what comes next," Natalie said, her fingers continuing to move across the keys. "It's about taking chances and trusting strangers and stepping into unknown territory." "And what did you decide?" Natalie played the final measures of her composition and then turned to face him fully. "I decided that the worst thing that could happen is that this doesn't work out and I end up back where I started. But the best thing that could happen is that it changes my life completely." "So that's a yes? That's a yes with conditions?" Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Name them." "Dada. First, I want a contract that protects both of us. Clear expectations defined. Boundaries and an exit clause if either of us wants out." "Agreed." "Second, I want to maintain my independence. I'll do the job you're paying me for, but I won't be controlled or managed in my personal life. Wouldn't dream of it." "Third, I want honesty between us. If your motivations change or if you start to regret this decision, I want you to tell me directly instead of making my life miserable until I quit." "Fair enough. Do I get to add conditions of my own?" Natalie nodded. "I need absolute discretion. Anything you see or hear in your capacity as my assistant stays confidential. My business dealings, my personal relationships, my family history, all of it, of course. I need loyalty. You'll be privy to information that could be valuable to my competitors or to the media. I need to know you won't use that against me. Have my word. I need you to understand that this won't be easy. The scrutiny, the assumptions people will make, the way your life will change just by association with mine. If you have any doubts, now is the time to voice them." Natalie considered his words carefully. She was about to enter a world she knew. Nothing about working for a man she barely knew, in a city that still felt foreign to her. Everything about it should have terrified her. Instead, she felt more alive than she had in months. "I understand the risks," she said. "I'm willing to take them." Jackson stood and extended his hand. "Then welcome to New York, Natalie Harper. I have a feeling our lives just got a lot more interesting." As she shook his hand, Natalie felt the last of her old life slip away. Tomorrow, she would call Dr. Reeves with good news. Tomorrow, she would move into her new apartment and begin a job unlike anything she'd ever imagined. Tomorrow, her real adventure would begin. But tonight, she played piano for a billionaire who listened like every note mattered, and tried not to think about how dangerous it was becoming to care what he thought of her music. A new world 3 months. Into her position as Jackson Pierce's personal assistant, Natalie had learned to navigate a world she never could have imagined. Her apartment in the Azure was beautiful beyond her dreams. With 2 bedrooms, marble counters, and a view of the Hudson River that took her breath away every morning. More importantly, her arrangement with Jackson had given her exactly what she needed. Dr. Reeves had been delighted to offer her the position at Harmony Arts Academy. Natalie now spent her mornings teaching music to children whose passion reminded her why she'd chosen this career in the first place. Her afternoons, and evenings were devoted to Jackson's increasingly complex schedule. She coordinated meetings with executives, managed household staff, and handled correspondence that ranged from business proposals to charity requests. The work was challenging but rewarding, and she discovered she had a natural talent for organization and diplomacy. What she hadn't expected was how much she would enjoy Jackson's company. Their professional relationship had evolved into something that felt like friendship, though she was careful never to presume too much. He was brilliant, surprisingly funny when he let his guard down, and more thoughtful than the business magazines suggested. He remembered that she preferred her coffee with cream, kept fresh flowers in the penthouse because she'd mentioned loving their scent, and often asked about her students at the academy. But Natalie was also learning about the challenges. Jackson had warned her about paparazzi had started following her, hoping to catch her in compromising situations with her famous employer. Gossip websites speculated endlessly about their relationship, analyzing every photo for signs of romance. The attention was overwhelming. For someone who had lived quietly in small-town Ohio just months before, this particular morning, Natalie was reviewing Jackson's calendar when she heard raised voices from his study. The door was closed, but she could hear enough to know he was arguing with someone about a business deal. When the voices stopped, she expected to hear the door open, but instead there was only tense silence. She knocked softly. "Jackson, is everything all right? Come in," his voice called, sounding strained. She found him standing by the window with his back to the door, his shoulders rigid with tension. The remains of what had clearly been an important document were scattered across his desk, torn into pieces. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "My brother happened," Jackson said without turning around. "Thomas has a gift for destroying things I care about." Natalie had heard Jackson mention his younger brother only in passing, always with a combination of love and frustration that suggested a complicated relationship. "Do you want to talk about it?" Jackson finally turned, and she was startled by the anger in his green eyes. "He's attempting a hostile takeover of my company. My own brother is trying to steal everything I've built." The words hit Natalie like a physical blow. She'd come to understand how much Pierce technology meant to Jackson, not just as a business, but as a legacy he was building. Can he do that? He thinks he can. He's been quietly buying up shares through shell companies for months. Combined with his own inheritance and some investors who've always questioned my leadership, he might have enough to force me out. But why would he want to? Jackson's laugh was bitter, because Thomas has always believed he deserved more than he got, because our father left me the company when Thomas thought it should have been his, because I've spent years trying to protect him from his own poor decisions, and he resents me for it. Natalie could see how much the betrayal was costing him. For all his wealth and success, Jackson was intensely private and trusted very few people. To be attacked by his own family must have felt like the worst kind of violation. "What can you do?" she asked. "Fight. But it's going to get ugly, and it's going to be very public. The media loves a family feud, especially when there are billions of dollars at stake." He looked at her with something that might have been regret. "I'm sorry, Natalie. This isn't what you signed up for." It's exactly what I signed up for," she replied, moving to collect the torn papers from his desk. "Supporting you through difficult situations is literally in my job description. This is different. The scrutiny is going to intensify. Reporters are going to dig into every aspect of my life, looking for weaknesses or scandals. Anyone close to me becomes a target." As if summoned by his words, Natalie's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She'd learned to screen these carefully, as reporters had started calling her directly when they couldn't reach Jackson. "Don't answer," Jackson said, when he saw her hesitate. "It's probably another journalist looking for quotes about our relationship." "Relationship?" Natalie asked, though her cheeks warmed as she said it. Jackson looked at her for a long moment. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" The complication that evening, Natalie was preparing dinner in her apartment when she heard a knock at her door. She opened it to find Jackson holding a bottle of wine and looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I brought peace offerings," he said, holding up the bottle. "I realized I was rather intense earlier, and I wanted to apologize." "You were dealing with your brother trying to steal your company?" Natalie replied, stepping aside to let him in. "I think intense was appropriate." Jackson looked around her apartment as if seeing it for the first time. She'd made it her own. With plants, books, and photographs from home, and he seemed to take in each personal detail. "It suits you," he said. Warm and welcoming, but with hidden depths. The comment made Natalie's pulse quicken, but she tried to keep things light. "Are you analyzing my decorating choices, Mr. Pierce?" "I'm trying to understand how someone I've known for 3 months has become so important to my life that the thought of losing you terrifies me more than losing my company." The confession stopped Natalie in her tracks. She'd been trying so hard to maintain professional boundaries, to ignore the growing attraction between them, that she hadn't allowed herself to consider that Jackson might be struggling with the same feelings. "Jackson," she began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish before I lose my nerve. I know this complicates everything, but I can't pretend any more that what I feel for you is purely professional." Natalie set down the wine he'd brought, her hands shaking slightly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I've fallen in love with you." The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for weeks. "I'm saying that somewhere between your first night in my penthouse and this moment, you became the most important person in my world." The admission hung between them, changing everything. Natalie felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling as she looked at this powerful, complicated man who was offering her his heart. "I love you too," she whispered, and saw relief flood his features. "I've been trying not to, because I was terrified of what it would mean." Jackson crossed the space between them in 2 steps and cupped her face in his hands. "What does it mean, Natalie?" "It means everything changes," she said, leaning into his touch. "It means we're not just employer and employee anymore. It means the tabloids are going to have a field day. It means your brother might use our relationship against you." "I don't care about any of that," Jackson said fiercely. "I care about you. I care about us." When he kissed her, it was with months of suppressed longing and the desperation of a man who had found something worth fighting for. Natalie melted into him, feeling like she was finally home in a way she'd never experienced before. The storm. The next morning brought catastrophe in the form of headlines that made Natalie's stomach drop. "Billionaire's secret affair with employees" screamed across the front page of 3 different tabloids, complete with photographs that had clearly been taken with telephoto lenses. Now pictures of Jackson leaving her apartment building early in the morning, of them having dinner at a quiet restaurant the week before, of her hand briefly touching his arm as they walked. "How did they get these?" Natalie asked, staring at the images that made their relationship look sordid and calculated. Jackson's jaw was tight as he reviewed the papers. "Professional photographers who've been following us for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment." Natalie's phone had been ringing nonstop since 6 in the morning. Porters, friends from Ohio, even her former colleagues at the school she'd left behind. Everyone wanted to know if the stories were true, if she'd really seduced her billionaire boss, if she was just another gold digger who'd gotten lucky. "I need to resign," she said quietly. "This is exactly what you were worried about. I'm becoming a liability." "Absolutely not," Jackson replied, his voice harder than she'd ever heard it. "We knew this would happen. We decided it was worth it. That was before your brother was trying to steal your company. Now he can point to these headlines and claim you're distracted, making poor decisions based on emotion rather than business sense." Jackson pulled her into his arms, and she felt some of her panic subside. "Thomas can claim whatever he wants. I'm not giving you up because of tabloid gossip. But what if it costs you everything? Then we'll build something new together." His green eyes were fierce with determination. "I won't let fear make decisions for us, Natalie. We're stronger than that." The battle, the hostile takeover attempt, dominated the business news for weeks. Thomas Pierce painted himself as the responsible family member trying to save the company from Jackson's reckless leadership. He pointed to failed ventures, questioned major decisions, and implied that Jackson's judgment was compromised by his relationship with his assistant. Natalie watched Jackson work 18-hour days, calling in favors from investors, negotiating with shareholders, and fighting for every vote on the board of directors. She supported him however she could, managing his schedule with ruthless efficiency, ensuring he ate regular meals, and providing a calm presence when the stress threatened to overwhelm him. The media attention intensified beyond anything she could have imagined. Photographers camped outside her apartment building, Reporters called her former students, her friends from Ohio, anyone who might provide salacious details about her past. Someone even tracked down Casey, who thankfully refused to speak to them. I never realized how exhausting it would be to have every moment of your life analyzed, Natalie confessed to Jackson one evening as they reviewed the latest batch of articles. It's the price of visibility, he replied, though she could see the toll it was taking on him too. The question is whether what we have is worth paying it. Natalie looked at this man who had transformed her life in ways she was still discovering. He'd given her opportunities she never could have achieved alone. But more than that, he'd given her love that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. You're worth any price, she said simply, and meant it completely. The final confrontation came at the annual shareholders' meeting, held in Pierce Technologies' gleaming conference center. Natalie sat in the back of the room, technically, present as Jackson's assistant, but really there to support the man she loved as he fought for his life's work. Thomas Pierce gave an impassioned speech about returning the company to its core values and traditional leadership. He was charismatic and persuasive, painting Jackson as out of touch and driven by personal interests rather than shareholder value. When Jackson took the podium, Natalie held her breath. She'd seen his notes, knew he planned to address the personal attacks directly. My brother has raised questions about my judgment, Jackson began, his voice carrying easily through the large room. He suggested that my relationship with Natalie Harper represents poor decision-making and divided priorities. I'd like to address that directly. Natalie felt every eye in the room turn toward her, and she fought the urge to shrink into her seat. 3 months ago, I met a woman who had lost everything and was starting over with nothing but talent, determination, and integrity. She could have taken advantage of her access to my life for personal gain. Instead, she worked harder than anyone I've ever known to build something of her own. She brought music back into my world, reminded me why I started this company in the first place, and showed me what it means to fight for something you believe in. Jackson's eyes found hers across the crowded room. Loving Natalie Harper hasn't compromised my judgment. It's made me a better leader, a more focused entrepreneur, and a more complete human being. If that's poor decision-making, then I'm guilty as charged. The room was silent as Jackson continued with his presentation, systematically dismantling Thomas's arguments and laying out his vision for the company's future. When the votes were tallied, Jackson retained control by a narrow margin. Ever after. 6 months later, Natalie stood at the piano in Jackson's penthouse, playing a new composition she'd written for their wedding ceremony. The piece was complex and joyful, weaving together melodies that represented their individual journeys and the harmony they'd created together. Jackson emerged from the bedroom, adjusting his tie with the nervous energy of a man about to marry the love of his life. Are you ready for this? To marry you in front of 300 people, including reporters who will analyze every detail of my dress, my flowers, and my facial expressions? Natalie grinned. Absolutely. The wedding was held at the Azure, transformed into something magical with flowers and lights that rivaled any fairy tale. Dr. Reeves attended, proud of her former job candidate who had found love while pursuing her dreams. Casey flew in from Ohio, amazed by her best friend's transformation, but more amazed by how happy Natalie clearly was. As they exchanged vows, Natalie looked into Jackson's green eyes and saw their entire future reflected there. It would include challenges, scrutiny, and complications they couldn't yet imagine. But it would also include music, laughter, and love that had already survived more tests than most couples faced in a lifetime. When Jackson kissed her after they were pronounced husband and wife, the photographer captured a moment that made the front page of every society magazine. But for once, Natalie didn't care about the headlines.